I saw a one-frame cartoon of two men in biblical times were walking away from one of Jesus' sermons, and one of the men asked the other, okay, so the meek inherit the earth, and the rich will have a hard time getting into heaven, but what about the middle class? And that is supposed to be funny, but there's actually was not much, if any, of the middle class back then. Most people were very, very poor, and the poor made up most of Jesus' audiences. And nonetheless, Jesus' teachings have a universal application across the classes. So middle class person, I never tire of hearing the wonderful words from Jesus' sermon on the plain. He's speaking to us as much as the poor and the rich. Casey just nicely read the New Revised Standard English translation of the words from a part of that sermon on the plain that are found in the Gospel of Luke. Many of us may know those verses as the Beatitudes. The word Beatitudes means blessings. We might also know the Beatitudes in a little different form from the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus says similar blessings in the Sermon on the Mount. The words of Jesus preached on the plain or mount or anywhere else for that matter were obviously not printed in newspaper reports or broadcasts on media when he said them. And it's very unlikely anyone wrote them down at the time, since most folks Jesus spoke to and hung around with didn't read, they didn't write. Scholars think it was at least 20 years or more before anyone thought to write Jesus' sayings down. Until then, Jesus' words were passed around by word of mouth, person to person. Any actual words of Jesus that we have today came from what is called the oral tradition, the word of mouth preservation of his sayings. And because no one is known to have written Jesus' sayings down when he said them, it's a miracle that we have them at all. And Jesus' saying in Luke and also in Matthew were derived from the earlier book of Mark and at least one earlier lost gospel referred to as Q. And they also seem to have included local oral traditions that they had access to. And scholars believe that Jesus' sayings that we now have in the Bible were not actually written down until 40 or more years after Jesus lived. And so it's reasonable to conclude, given that long time and the lack of literacy and the rarity of writing down a peasant rabbi's words in first century Palestine, that without more, there's a shakiness to certainty around the sayings of Jesus in the Bible. And folks who believe the Bible is inerrant and literal may take them all at face value and believe they are what Jesus said. But many folks reading the Gospels don't accept that approach as necessarily reasonable. Many Christians aren't afraid to apply a reasoned, scholastic approach to the truths of the Gospel and the rest of the Bible for that matter. And I'm one of those folks, as are a number of church members, along with many serious and well-respected Bible scholars. And our adult forum class that John has been leading is considering in detail this more critical approach to the Bible. And one of the cool things about the scholarly approach is that by using historical detective work, academic specialists in the New Testament have figured out ways to suss out the likelihood Jesus said was attributed to him. And it takes longer than a sermon to explain it all, but basically they start with the premise that each gospel account of a Jesus saying is hearsay. It's hearsay that needs some evidentiary proof to support the conclusion Jesus said it or might have said it. And evidence that weighs heavy in the analysis is other sources that attest to the words, as well as whether the nature of the words are less likely to have been made up, like distinctive words, especially those that are counterculture or not flattering to remember, or those that fit with what we know about Jesus. And connections of the sayings with known history and culture are also weighed. And the research and reasoning that I'm talking about still takes place, but in the late 1980s and early 1990s, famous gathering of New Testament academics used it to consider the question, what did Jesus say? And they called themselves the Jesus Seminar. And along the way, they created a wonderful translation of the Gospels called the Scholars Version, which tries to capture the writing style of the original authors of each Gospel. So the very different voices are heard. And many of the scholars that you have heard pastors preach and teach in this church for a number of years were fellows of the Jesus Seminar. The fellows include Marcus Ford, John Dominic Cross, John Shelby Spong, Stephen Patterson, Karen Armstrong, Robin Myers, and Robert Funk. Those are solid, well-respected, serious, and pretty famous experts. And they were joined by 39 other serious, respected Jesus scholars in doing this work. And the Jesus Seminar was quite an undertaking. It lasted 6 years and resulted in a number of remarkable books. And the one I used for this sermon is called The Five Gospels. What did Jesus really say? It has the words of Jesus in colors coded, and they indicate the levels of likelihood that Jesus said that. It's one of my favorite books about Jesus and the Gospels. And I bought it long ago when I first started coming back to church. And it served to help me set aside misinformation and get to the heart of Jesus and his message. I've developed misconceptions about Jesus from fundamentalists and literalists and church doctrines, and even from reading the Bible without understanding its origins and the historical, cultural, and theological context of Jesus and of the early church. The book was among the readings that helped me personally find Jesus and helped lead me to become a Christian and then, of course, a minister. And it may not work for everyone, but it certainly worked for me. And one of the great things about the Jesus Seminar book, The Five Gospels, What Did Jesus Really Say, is that it concisely explains the theories about each gospel's formation, and it has commentary notes explaining the reason for the Jesus Seminar conclusions about each set of verses. It's pretty cool. Well, to a Bible geek, anyway. While the lecture for the Adult Forum video series, Professor Bart Ehrman was not one of the Jesus scholars. He is a well-known and respected, sometimes controversial, progressive Christian scholar, and he uses this reasoned approach, as you've heard in that class, to the Bible. And I've just generally set out the gist of the respected scholarly approach that these folks take, and I know it can seem overwhelming. If it helps, the short and simple explanation is they essentially see if there is evidence outside each gospel that can back up what Jesus is reported to have said. If they can't back it up, they say so. If they can back it up, they say that too. And the result is that reason and research are given weight over theology and creeds, and we end up with really awesome results. Reasoned proof of what Jesus said, or probably said, or didn't say. And that excites me. I've mentioned before that I love seeing words Jesus likely said. They have a lot of power in my personal faith. And some folks get that with belief alone. I found that I need reason to help me along. And this all relates to our lesson because the proof the scholars found made them as certain as they can be that Jesus actually said in Aramaic, the first of the blessings that Casey read in the New Revised Standard English translation. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. The scholars are also as certain as they can be that Jesus said, love your enemies. And it's also pretty certain he instructed his followers to personally turn the other cheek and to give to everyone who begs. And while it's true that the scholars are not sure Jesus actually said all of the words attributed to him in today's lesson, that doesn't necessarily make them less sacred or lacking in value. At the very least, they can help us better grasp theological understandings as they develop around Jesus and his movement and the church. and its traditions. On my faith journey, I particularly like knowing it can be proven that Jesus very likely said, love your enemies, turn the other cheek, give to those who beg, and blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. I don't have to suspend reason or disbelief to claim those words mattered enough for Jesus to have said them, and his earliest followers to have committed them to memory and passed them along with years. And the later followers found them so important, they wrote them down for us. Those sayings are the types of things that the Jesus of radical love, whom I know and experience, would have preached and taught. But my opinion and sense of who Jesus is to me and who Jesus is to anyone else is not how the scholars figured out what was likely said by Jesus. They used evidence and reason to draw their conclusions. And for me, this raises burning theological and ethical issues. It's raised by the determination that Jesus very said, love your enemies, the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor, the hungry, and those who weep. And among those issues is why don't we hear every theologian and preacher and person claiming to be a Christian push those proclamations to the top of the list of what Christians need to take heart and action on? Shouldn't we be loving enemies as Jesus told us to? And shouldn't we work to make that a priority in our culture? Shouldn't we be blessing the poor if Jesus told us to? Shouldn't we work to make that a priority in our culture? Shouldn't we be blessing the hungry? And shouldn't we work to make that a priority in our culture? Shouldn't we be blessing those who have reason to weep? And shouldn't we work to make that a priority in our culture? A stack of flyers from a religious Ohio organization was left at the front door of the church before last week's election. It listed 9 items to weigh in the U.S. Senate race. Not one of the items mentioned Jesus. Not one. Not one of the items mentioned a teaching of Jesus. Not one. I recycled the pamphlets. Every election, we encounter religious people pushing others to vote on issues Jesus never addressed, about things not even close to adhering to gospel teachings. And ironically, I don't recall ever reading or hearing the same sort of religious people pushing for votes on the issues that Jesus actually addressed and clearly cared about. It seems to me Christians should be aware of and consider supporting things and people in the world, including those on ballots that will come close to doing what we can. What we've proved Jesus and his way are about, not what religious people care about in their way. If we want to vote Jesus' way, why not start with the word scholars are sure as can be Jesus said, like, love your enemies, blessed are the poor, the hungry, and those who weep. Should we ask for this candidate, for this item, work toward loving enemies? Shouldn't we ask, will the candidate or ballot item work toward blessing the poor, the hungry, and those who weep? Shouldn't we ask, would Jesus vote for this person or that thing? I'm advocating that those who follow Jesus should consider voting in ways most likely to get done what Jesus cares about on his way, and that we can actually tell it's his way if we actually find him addressing the issue in the Gospels. I'm not advocating for any person or party on a ballot. Well, except for Jesus.